President Trump scolds the UN, accusing them of funding a war against themselves and commanding them to step it up.
They're buying oil and gas from Russia while they're fighting Russia. It's embarrassing to them, and it was very embarrassing to them when I found out about it, I can tell you that.
I'm Daily Wire Executive Editor John Bickley with Georgia Howe. It's Wednesday, September 24th. This is Morning Wire.
Google admits they caved to the Biden administration's demands to censor Americans on YouTube.
Again, a win for the First Amendment, a win for free expression.
And Jimmy Kimmel returns after less than a week of suspension by Disney.
I'm not sure who had a weirder 48 hours, me or the CEO of Tylenol.
Thanks for waking up with Morning Wire. Stay tuned. We have the news you need to know.
This episode is brought to you by American Beverage, representing the local and many family-owned bottlers and distributors of Coca-Cola, Dr. Pepper, and Pepsi products operating in all 50 states. These are drinks we've all loved for generations. These iconic brands are part of the American story and have been for over 100 years. With all the talks about American jobs lately, American beverage companies have been delivering on that promise all along. They always have been and always will be American companies making American products with American workers in American hometowns. 275,000 men and women in all 50 states show up every day, do the work, and deliver for our economy and our communities. Learn more about America's beverage companies at wedeliverforamerica.org.
In a scathing speech on Tuesday, President Trump slammed world leaders at the United Nations, warning that their countries are going to hell.
Daily Wire senior editor Cabot Phillips is here with the highlights from the fiery address and the fallout. So, Cabot, a pretty remarkable speech from the president yesterday. What did he say?
Well, we said Monday that there could be fireworks, and that turned out to be an understatement. It was sort of reminiscent of that classic Festivus episode of Seinfeld where each character got up and aired their grievances with all their friends at the table. That is essentially what Donald Trump did Tuesday during his hour-long speech, just unloading on the UN, calling it incompetent, inefficient, and weak, and then warning that mass migration, climate alarmism, and political correctness were, in his words, laying siege to the organization's founding principles. Have a listen.
What is the purpose of the United Nations? The UN has such tremendous potential. For the most part, at least for now, all they seem to do is write a really strongly worded letter and then never follow that letter up. It's empty words, and empty words don't solve war. The only thing that solves war and wars is action.
President Trump devoted much of his speech to immigration, understandably so, warning Western allies that their insistence on allowing unfettered mass migration was destroying their countries from within.
When your prisons are filled with so-called asylum seekers who repaid kindness, and that's what they did, they repaid kindness with crime, it's time to end the failed experiment of open borders.
And as you might expect, the president also took aim at the UN's decades-long push to embrace far-left green energy initiatives, which he says have been ineffective and, more importantly, increased our reliance on China and other bad actors who don't care about the environment.
The entire globalist concept of asking successful industrialized nations to inflict pain on themselves and radically disrupt their entire societies must be rejected completely and totally, and it must be immediate. The primary effect of these brutal green energy policies has not been to help the environment, but to redistribute manufacturing and industrial activity from developed countries that follow the insane rules that are put down to polluting countries that break the rules.
Now, the president also addressed the renewed push for Palestinian statehood from certain corners. What did he say on that regard?
Yeah, this topic got arguably more attention than any other yesterday and throughout the week for that matter, as influential member states have joined the call for Palestinian statehood. But President Trump remained adamant that such a move would only reward Hamas terrorists and also incentivize more October 7th style attacks in the future.
The rewards would be too great for Hamas terrorists for their atrocities. This would be a reward for these horrible atrocities, including October 7th, even while they refuse to release the hostages or accept a ceasefire.
Now, the president also made some pretty remarkable statements regarding Ukraine, a pretty big turnaround from his previous stance. What did he say?
So after his address, Trump sat for a separate private meeting with Volodymyr Zelensky, And like you said, emerged with a much more supportive stance on Ukraine than we've seen from him in the past. Remember, he initially vowed to end the war on day one of his administration, and then in recent months said that Ukraine would need to accept a deal that resulted in handing over territory to Putin. But on Tuesday, he said the Ukrainians can actually retake the 20% of their land that's currently held by Russia. Writing on Truth Social, he said that after getting to know the situation and fully understand the war, quote, I think Ukraine, with the support of the European Union, is in a position to fight and win all of Ukraine back in its original form. With time, patience, and the financial support of Europe, and in particular NATO, the original borders from where this war started is very much an option. So again, that's a huge concession from Trump here in support of Ukraine. Now, big picture, this could all just be a leverage play to try and put pressure on Putin and bring him back to the table. But regardless, this was music to the ears of NATO and many UN allies who were gathered there this week.
Well, that would be an unbelievable win if they could get it. Cabot, thanks for reporting.
Absolutely.
This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. You and I make decisions every day, but on Prize Picks, being right can get you paid. Don't miss out on any of the excitement this season on Prize Picks, where it's good to be right. Football is back, and there's no better way to add a bit more fun than with Prize Picks. Stack up your favorite players' stats against each other, and you can even bring in players from other sports. Prize Picks is the ultimate way to turn your football knowledge into cash this season. With millions of users already on board, this safe and reliable skills-based daily fantasy platform lets you build your lineup in under 60 seconds by selecting more or less on 2 to 6 player projections. Whether you're confident about which players will exceed expectations or which ones might fall short, Prize Picks gives you the opportunity to cash in on your sports expertise. Available in over 40 states, including California, Texas, and Georgia, it's never been easier to enjoy daily fantasy action while watching your favorite games unfold. Download the app today and use code MorningWire to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code MorningWire to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. It's good to be right.
Google admitted Tuesday to caving to censorship pressure from the Biden administration, and it's now committing to allowing all creators who they kicked off YouTube over so-called political speech violations the chance to return.
The admission from Google came in a letter to the House Judiciary Committee and its chairman, Jim Jordan. He joins us now. Congressman, thank you so much for coming on.
You bet, Doug. Good to be with you.
So Google sent this letter to the Judiciary Committee on Tuesday, and it includes some major admissions. First, how did this come about, and what did the letter say?
This is part of our 3-year investigation into what some have called the censorship industrial complex, where you have government pressuring big tech, big media to censor Americans, typically was conservative Americans, kicking them off platforms, demonetizing, but you name it. And, of course, last August, a year ago, we had Mark Zuckerberg send the committee a letter, and he said, yeah, Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it. We're sorry, and we're going to stop. And they, to their credit, they have. And in essence, Google sent a similar type statement to the committee that was released today. They, in fact, were censoring, Americans. They'd kicked some people off the YouTube platform altogether. Your channel, you're gone. They've agreed to reinstate those individuals, which I think is good. They've said they will not use the fact checkers like other platforms have done, which was a big problem because fact checkers are typically really biased against conservative. So I thought it was again a win for the First Amendment, a win for free expression.
Now, as we've highlighted here with you on this show, this is really a part of a pattern from the Biden administration when it comes to pressuring platforms to censor Americans. What else have you uncovered?
Well, never forget, the Biden administration established the Disinformation Governance Board. Mm-hmm. I mean, the most Orwellian sounding thing you could think of, as if a bunch of bureaucrats can tell you what you can say, what you can read, what you can tweet, what you can post. That was frightening stuff. And then a bunch of us spoke up about that. You guys, a bunch of folks. And I will never forget when we had RFK Jr. testify in front of our committee last Congress. He said something that he said when he endorsed President Trump a year ago. He said, when you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. It is always the bad guys.
What about people who would try to connect this to what just happened with Jimmy Kimmel and the FCC started weighing in about the public airwaves and how they're being used by ABC? Do you feel like that's a hypocritical moment from the Trump administration?
No, I look at that as just a purely business decision. This is the old Michael Jordan line, Republicans buy sneakers too. Mm-hmm. I think at some point ABC was starting to think like, where is our audience? Or at least they should be thinking this. You got someone who's insulting potentially half the audience every single night. and you have people who own a number of your affiliates in Sinclair and in Nexstar who are saying, this is not what our viewers want to see. ABC's announced the Kimmel is going to go back on. I think that underscores that this wasn't driven by government. This was a decision they were making that they thought was in the best interest of their particular business.
Final question. What are the next steps in terms of holding Google and other big tech platforms accountable to make sure this kind of censorship doesn't happen under another administration?
Well, we're really focused on Europe now because we think it's just a matter of time where something that happened a few weeks back, if you remember, Graham Linehan is a comedian, Irish citizen who tweeted something while in the United States, flies to the UK. When he lands at Heathrow Airport, he's arrested. I think it's just a matter of time before that happens to an American. So we're particularly concerned about that. Relative to YouTube, there's still this issue, I think, that we're trying to make sure we understand fully this, how people are being demonetized. We're still trying to look at that a little bit as well. But the big news, of course, here is that people who were kicked off can go back on. And we think that is a big win. And the fact that they admitted they're not going to use fact checkers like other platforms have done, and that they admitted that what happened should not have happened.
Yeah, the admission is now fully on the record. Congressman, thank you so much for joining us.
You bet. Thanks, guys.
Late night host Jimmy Kimmel is back on air, but with limited viewership, and Charlie Kirk's legacy continues.
Here to discuss is Daily Wire reporter Amanda Prestigiacomo. Hey, Amanda. So we covered Kimmel's very short-lived suspension last week. He returned to the air last night. First, what did we hear from Kimmel?
Well, Kimmel, who was suspended after misleading his audience about the assassination of Charlie Kirk, he took to the airwaves and he did what I suspect many people thought he would do. Here's what he said.
The President of the United States made it very clear he wants to see me and the hundreds of people who work here fired from our jobs. Our leader celebrates Americans losing their livelihoods because he can't take a joke. We have to speak out against this because he's not stopping. And it's not just comedy. He's gunning for our journalists.
But Kimmel did address his comments about the Kirk assassination directly.
I do want to make something clear because it's important to me as a human, and that is, you understand that it was never my intention to make light of the murder of a young man, nor was it my intention to blame any specific group for the actions of what it was obviously a deeply disturbed individual. That was really the opposite of the point I was trying to make, but I understand that to some that felt either ill-timed or unclear, or maybe both. And for those who think I did point a finger, I get why you're upset. If the situation was reversed, there's a good chance I'd have felt the same way.
Now, it's important to note, though, that while the suspension was lifted by Disney, Kimmel didn't have nearly the reach that he usually does. Dozens of ABC affiliates refused to air Jimmy Kimmel Live on their stations. Nexstar, for example, they own 32 ABC affiliates, and they stood by Disney's original reasons for suspending the host, and they maintained that position until, quote, all parties are committed to fostering an environment of respectful, constructive dialogue. And we also have Sinclair Broadcast Group. They operate 40 ABC affiliates. They still aren't airing Jimmy Kimmel Live either. And the group said earlier this week that they're in discussions with ABC as they evaluate the show's potential return. And quick reminder here, Kimmel was suspended after he falsely suggested that Kirk was murdered by someone from the MAGA gang. And this was after officials made very clear that the suspected assassin was a leftist who thought Kirk's conservative views were, quote, hateful, and that he was also in a relationship with a trans-identifying male roommate.
Now, let's actually turn our attention fully back to Charlie Kirk. He had a planned campus tour, and that's continuing on. Tell us about that.
Kirk was shot and killed during the first stop of that American comeback tour on September 10th. But Turning Point made very clear that that tour will go on. Erica Kirk, Charlie's widow, who's now been named as Turning Point CEO, she vowed just days after her husband was murdered that his legacy will live on, that this tour will continue. And in fact, they're adding more tours in the coming years. The tour has been rebranded in Kirk's memory, and it's now called This is the Turning Point Tour. Turning Point has already tapped a number of personalities and politicos on the right to fill these spots, and more names will be announced in the coming days. So far, speakers include the Daily Wire's Michael Knowles, Megyn Kelly, Glenn Beck, Alex Clark, Tucker Carlson, and a number of others.
Now, you mentioned Michael Knowles. He was actually slated to appear with Kirk at the University of Minnesota this past Monday. That event did take place. What sort of response did we see there?
Well, the event drew a massive crowd, and there were actually chants of Kirk's name, and it was very emotional at times. This was originally scheduled as a discussion between Knowles and Kirk, but it largely turned into a discussion about Kirk and his mission. Knowles, got a little choked up when he presented an empty, open seat next to him on stage for Kirk. Knowles also gave some really powerful comments about the assassination.
The enemies of civilization, the assassin, as well as the people who excused and cheered him on, thought that they could stop Charlie Kirk's movement. In reality, they have not even stopped his lecture tour.
And of course, he did take questions from people who disagreed with him. Here he is actually addressing this Kimmel controversy.
The shooter was a radical left-wing activist who inscribed Antifa slogans on the bullets and was dating a trans furry boyfriend. I don't think he voted for Trump. Kimmel lied. The audience turned on him. The affiliates turned on him. He deserves to lose his job. I'm frankly disappointed that he's getting his job again, but I'm confident even fewer people will watch it this time.
That's really impressive to see that tour continuing on in the honor of Kirk. Amanda, thank you so much for reporting.
You're welcome.
Thanks for waking up with us. And if you're watching on YouTube, please like and subscribe. We'll be back later this evening with more news you need to know.